The East-West House: Noguchi's Childhood in Japan by Christy Hale. In 1901, Japanese poet Yonihiro Noguchi arrived in New York. Although he had already published 2 books of poetry in English, Yoni was still unsure of the language. He advertised for assistance and hired Leonie Gilmore, a Scotch-Irish-American editor and teacher. The two worked well together, and soon a romance developed. Yoni declared his love for Leonie and promised they would marry. But in the spring of 1904, Yoni suddenly returned to Japan, even though Leonie was expecting their child. Leonie and her mother then moved to Los Angeles, where the baby was born on November 17, 1904. Yoni realized he still needed Leonie's help with his English works, and he tried to convince her to come to Japan. Leonie refused at first, but finally decided to go. She feared that growing anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States would affect her biracial child. So, in March 1907, Leonie and her 2-year-old son journeyed from the west to the east. Father's house in Tokyo glowed with moonlight through shoji screens. Shadows on the wall moved like waves as tiny fingers curled in play. With Mama, he had sailed countless days from America to this unknown place. Then a stranger father chose his name. Isamu, Mr. Courageous. Now father had another family. His home was not their harbor. Outside, a bamboo flute cried through barren trees, and a chilly wind scattered leaves. Unwelcome, yet they remained, never long in any place. They were gaijin, foreigners, shunned by everyone. Together they explored Japan, sat silently in gardens. Isamu listened to wind and current. He held each leaf up close. He walked, watching shadows shift. Light on stone revealed secret colors. Water mirrored shapes above. A kaleidoscope in motion. Earth, rock, flowers, trees. These were Isamu's trusted friends. He dug deep to make his own stream and steered its course with a stone. At school, he tried to join in play, but others teased and turned from him. Left out and alone, Isamu made a different kind of joy. He molded clay to form a wave, then painted it blue like Mama's eyes. Holding soft earth in his hands, he almost forgot his loneliness. Mama bought a tiny wedge of land under Shigasaki pines, an unwanted, awkward, sloping lot looking out to sea. Only 8, Isamu drew up plans to make a small, distinctive house, half Eastern, half Western in design. It was a mixture like his own. He supervised construction, watched each detail with care. Evenings he shared his notes with Mama, reports of his dreams growing tall. 3 rooms laid out on the bottom floor, and 1 large room on top. The builders done, now it remained for Isamu to add his touch. Apprenticed to a carpenter, he sculpted waves in cherry wood, carved panels for the sliding doors that moved from east to west and back again. He nestled close to Mama's side as she read him myths of ancient Greece. Outside their window, Mount Fuji swelled, inspiration for Isamu to hold. With the world in his hands, his imagination soared, and where emptiness once lived, Isamu created home. Isamu and his mother arrived in Yokohama, Japan on March 26, 1907, after a 17-day crossing of the Pacific Ocean aboard the steamship Mongolia. Yonihiro Noguchi met them and they traveled to his home in Tokyo. Yoni's relationship with Leone was strained, and he was often away. Eventually, Leone became aware that Yoni had married a Japanese woman and was keeping two households. Leone and Isamu moved out of Yoni's house, but remained in Japan. Yoni had no further presence in Isamu's boyhood. His father's abandonment and his own mixed racial and cultural heritage were constant sources of confusion and discomfort for Isamu. His hair was wavy, and he wore Western-style clothing, so different from the Japanese children who bullied him regularly. Whatever situation I was in, I felt not quite one of them, Noguchi later said of his early social world. Leone Gilmore provided education, inspiration, and direction in young Isamu's life. She witnessed the prejudice he experienced as a biracial child. She also noted his pleasure and skill in creating with his hands. Leone steered Isamu toward the arts as a way of blending the conflicting parts of his life and gave him an opportunity to incorporate both parts of his heritage into the house they built in Chigasaki. The architecture mixed Western-style floorboards and windows with Japanese-style rooms and with sliding doors. Isamu closely monitored the carpenter's work. During his later apprenticeship with a local cabinet maker, Isamu learned to use Japanese tools and added his own carvings and construction to the Chigasaki house. Leone taught Isamu botany, and he created his own garden for their home. Childhood ended abruptly for Isamu in 1918. At age 13, his mother sent him to Interlaken, an innovative boarding school in Indiana where boys could work with their hands in a shop or in the garden. The school closed shortly after Isamu arrived and became an army training center for World War I. Dr. Edward Rumley, the school's founder, arranged for Isamu to attend a local high school. After graduation, Isamu wanted to become an artist, but Rumley guided him to study medicine, a more stable profession, at Columbia University in New York City. Leone moved to New York in 1924 and encouraged her son to enroll in an evening sculpture class at the Leonardo da Vinci Art School. 3 months later, Isamu had his first exhibit, and his career as a sculptor was launched. He dropped out of medical school to pursue art full-time. Isamu then changed his last name from Gilmore to Noguchi, which signified a feeling of reconnection with his artistic roots in Japan. Several mentors played significant roles in Isamu Noguchi's creative journey. His first teacher, Onorio Rotolo, at the Da Vinci School, taught him traditional sculpture techniques. In Paris in 1928, as an assistant to sculptor Constantine Bernucci, Noguchi learned to use his tools to work directly on the materials he was sculpting, to simplify line and form, and to explore less realistic, more abstract ways of expression. Back in New York in 1929, Noguchi sported himself by making busts of wealthy and famous people. One of the people he met was choreographer Martha Graham. He later collaborated with her for more than 30 years, designing theater sets that allowed dancers and objects to move more freely through space. Noguchi came to think of sculpture as more than just static, three-dimensional objects. His sculptures expressed movement. They presented different views and changing patterns of light and shadow, and gave a space a sense of depth. His imaginative garden and playground designs encouraged people's active participation. R. Buckminster Fuller, the architect, inventor, and visionary, became an intellectual influence on Noguchi, as well as a lifelong friend. The two explored how people live in their environments, and together they planned projects and made models of their ideas. The influences on Noguchi were many, but his love of earth, craftsmanship, and tools began in Japan. The airy rice paper Akari lamps he created were inspired by his earliest memories of moonlight shining through shoji screens in his father's home. Japanese gardens, which represent nature artistically for everyday enjoyment, shaped his desire to bring sculpture to a more direct involvement with the common experience of living, Noguchi said. For more than 6 decades, he worked toward this goal, bringing together ancient and modern, craft and technology, East and West. Before he died on December 30th, 1988, at the age of 84, Isamu Noguchi created 2 places to showcase his work: the Noguchi Museum in New York and the Studio Complex in Muri in the Japanese island of Shikoku. At these locations and others around the world, Noguchi's sculptures, furniture, and public spaces live on, dynamic testaments to the creative achievements of one of the 20th century's most innovative artists.